Welcome to today's deep dive. It's Sunday, March 1st, 2026, and today we're looking at a collection of records, legislative histories, court documents, things like that, that paint a picture of just incredible, almost jarring contrasts.
Yeah, jarring is definitely the right word for it.
Right, because on one side you have these deeply emotional, intensely personal, decades-long fights of innocent people just desperately trying to get out of a prison cell.
Hmm.
And on the exact opposite side, we're examining the slow, incredibly complex, and heavily bureaucratic machinery of state government that, actually holds the keys to those cells.
The machinery is what we're really digging into today.
Exactly. So today we're exploring the 2024 and 2025 legal and legislative landscape of the state of Missouri. We are talking about landmark Supreme Court rulings on wrongful convictions, high-stakes midnight legislative sessions.
Billion-dollar stadium deals.
Oh, yeah. Billion-dollar stadium deals and fierce marathon debates over who exactly controls local police departments.
It is a massive amount of information to synthesize.
Mm.
And our mission for this deep dive is to uncover how the laws passed in the state capitol directly shape human lives.
Yeah.
We're going to look at everything from the precise legal mechanisms of exonerating the innocent to the financial mechanics of funding major sports teams and really observe how the gears of justice and politics constantly grind against one another.
Right, the friction between them.
Exactly. We are going to connect the legal minutia from these legislative sessions and court rulings to the broader implications for you, the listener.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the absolute best place to start is with the human element. The records bring up two incredible names that really set the stage for everything else: Lamar Johnson and Christopher Dunn. Let's start with Lamar Johnson. There is a powerful history here detailing his exoneration after spending decades in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And the quote that stands out from him, the one that really anchors this whole discussion for me, is simply, "I would never give up."
It's incredibly powerful.
It really is. He spent decades fighting a system that had locked him away, and he finally won his freedom. But the second case, the case of Christopher Dunn, shows just how incredibly rigid and complicated that fight for freedom can actually be on a procedural level.
Right. Christopher Dunn's story is an astonishing look at the mechanics of the legal system. It exposes the real friction points between different branches of government.
Yeah.
So let's look at the facts. In July of 1991, Dunn was convicted after a jury trial of first-degree murder, 2 counts of first-degree assault, and 3 counts of armed criminal action.
Okay.
He was sentenced as a prior and persistent offender. The judge handed down life in prison without parole for the murder.
Which is heavy enough on its own.
Exactly.
Okay.
Plus 30 years for each assault and 10 years for each armed criminal action.
Right.
And crucially, all of those sentences were to be served consecutively.
Wow.
So he was looking at life without parole plus 70 years.
So, barring a miracle, he is effectively locked away forever. You hear a sentence like that, and it feels like a heavy steel door slamming shut. But then we fast forward to February 2024. The St. Louis Circuit Attorney, so the local prosecutor, files a motion to vacate Dunn's convictions. And they didn't just file this on a technicality like a missed filing deadline or a paperwork error.
No, not at all.
They filed it citing clear and convincing evidence of actual innocence.
Which is a very high bar to clear legally.
Right. And the local circuit court holds an evidentiary hearing, and they agree. They find that in light of new evidence, no juror, acting reasonably, would have voted to find Dunn guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So the circuit court vacates his convictions and orders his immediate release. Now, if you're listening to this, you'd think that's the end of the story, right?
You would think.
The local prosecutor says he's innocent. The local judge agrees he's innocent. Let the man go home.
You would certainly think so. But here is where it gets incredibly legally complicated. The local circuit attorney wanted Dunn freed. The local judge ordered him freed. But the state attorney general, operating out of the state capitol, stepped in, opposed the motion, and fought aggressively to keep him in prison.
It just sounds so counterintuitive.
It does. But this brings us to the actual legal mechanism at play here, which is Section 547.031 of the Missouri statutes.
Okay, let's break that down.
This is a specific law enacted to allow a prosecuting attorney or a circuit attorney to file a motion to vacate a judgment if they have information that the convicted person may be innocent or may have been erroneously convicted.
Right, and the statute requires a hearing, which happened, but the Attorney General appealed the local judge's decision to release him.
Yeah.
And this led to a landmark ruling by the Missouri Supreme Court in April 2025 known as In re Circuit Attorney, 22nd Judicial Circuit, ex-rel. Christopher Dunn.
It's a massive case.
Huge. And the core of this ruling is something that I think will truly surprise a lot of people, because the Supreme Court had to determine if the state attorney general even had the right to appeal this release in the first place.
That was the crux of the battle. The local circuit attorney argued that the state had no right to appeal under Section 547.031.
Because it's a specific process for local prosecutors to correct local mistakes.
Right. But what's fascinating here is the Missouri Supreme Court looked at a broader civil statute, Section 512.020, which grants the right to appeal to any aggrieved party in a civil action.
Wait, civil?
Yes, because a motion to vacate a conviction is technically considered a civil collateral attack on a criminal judgment. Therefore, the rules of civil procedure apply. So the Supreme Court ruled that the state of Missouri is, in fact, an aggrieved party.
Hold on, let me stop you right there. A civil collateral attack. For the listener who isn't a lawyer, what does that actually mean in the context of a guy sitting in a cell?
It's a great question. In the legal world, a direct attack is your standard appeal. You are directly challenging the trial court's decision right after you're convicted.
Okay.
A collateral attack is when you try to challenge the judgment in a separate secondary proceeding after your direct appeals have run out.
Got it.
And because this specific mechanism to vacate the sentence is housed under civil procedures rather than criminal ones, the state treats it as a civil lawsuit against the original criminal judgment.
Okay, that makes sense of the terminology, but let's look at the other phrase you used. The Supreme Court decided the state is an aggrieved party.
Right.
Why are they aggrieved? Because a man they locked up, who a judge just said is innocent, is being let go. How does that injure the state?
Legally speaking, the court determined that the state is aggrieved because the state has a vested, profound interest in the finality of its convictions.
I know.
Exactly. When a lower court vacates a conviction, it infringes on that interest of finality. The theory is that if convictions are never truly final, the justice system collapses under the weight of endless relitigation.
Because witnesses die.
Witnesses die, memories fade, and victims are forced to relive trauma indefinitely. Therefore, the Attorney General, acting as the lawyer for the state of Missouri, has the statutory right to appeal that decision to ensure the mandatory procedures are strictly enforced.
To prevent unending challenges to the finality of a judgment.
Exactly.
But wait, so the system is actively placing an enormous legal weight on a decision being final, sometimes seemingly in direct tension with the decision being correct.
That is the philosophical friction at the very heart of this case. The judicial system values truth, absolutely. But it also structurally requires finality to function.
To see how that friction played out in reality, we just have to look at the timeline for July 24, 2024.
It's unbelievable.
It is absolute chaos. The circuit court had ordered Dunn's release by 6 p.m. that evening. Imagine you're Christopher Dunn. Your bags are packed, you're watching the clock.
You're ready to walk out.
But the Attorney General immediately files an emergency petition for a writ of prohibition or mandamus with the state Supreme Court to stop it. Let's do another quick translation. What are those writs?
A writ of prohibition is exactly what it sounds like. It's a higher court ordering a lower court to stop doing something because they're exceeding their jurisdiction.
Okay.
A writ of mandamus, which comes from the Latin for we command, is a higher court ordering a government official or lower court to properly fulfill their official duties.
I see.
In this case, the Attorney General was asking the Supreme Court to command the lower court to halt the release.
And it worked. The Supreme Court issued a temporary stay, halting his release right at the deadline. Dunn didn't walk out at 6 p.m.
He stayed in his cell.
The Supreme Court eventually ruled that the circuit court lacked the authority to unconditionally release Dunn while the original criminal charges technically remained pending. They issued a permanent writ prohibiting his release without allowing the state to indicate its intent to retry him.
It's a profound illustration of the massive, often conflicting layers of the justice system. It really highlights that navigating a wrongful conviction is not merely a matter of proving actual innocence to a judge.
Right.
It's about navigating an incredibly rigid procedural maze where different branches of the same state government are actively fighting each other over jurisdiction, statutory interpretation, and this philosophy of finality.
So he stays in prison while the lawyers fight over the procedural definition of an aggrieved party. Finally, on July 30th, 2024, the circuit court amended its judgment. The circuit attorney filed a memorandum of nolle prosequi, which essentially means we are unwilling to pursue, formally dropping the pending criminal charges entirely.
Right.
Only after that precise procedural box was checked was Christopher Dunn finally released from prison.
Which brings up a crucial point for anyone trying to understand how government actually works. The justice system isn't a single, unified entity with one mind.
Far from it.
It's a complex machine with different actors who have vastly different, sometimes opposing, mandates. The local prosecutor's mandate is to seek justice in their specific jurisdiction, which in this case meant freeing a man they believe to be innocent.
Yeah.
The Attorney General's mandate, according to the Supreme Court, includes defending the finality of the state's convictions as a whole. When those mandates collide, human lives literally hang in the balance for days, months, or even years.
And those collisions in the judicial branch don't just stay in the courtroom. They send massive shockwaves straight across the street into the legislative branch. Which brings us to the 2025 Missouri legislative session.
This is a classic pattern in state government. When the courts expose a gap or a severe friction point in how justice is administered, like the grueling procedural battle over Christopher Dunn, the legislature often faces immense public and political pressure to build a bridge over that gap.
Yeah.
You start seeing bills introduced to fix the specific mechanical failure the court just highlighted.
We saw exactly that ripple effect in the Capitol. The Dunn and Johnson cases directly influenced the legislation being drafted and debated in 2025. Lawmakers introduced House Bills 1075 and 731,
Right.
which sought to establish freestanding claims of actual innocence in post-conviction actions. Before this, if you missed certain procedural filing deadlines, you couldn't always just bring a claim saying, hey, I have new evidence I'm actually innocent.
Right, the door was closed.
These bills aim to create a dedicated pathway for that.
Lawmakers also pushed for Senate Bill 36, which aimed to create a mechanism for compensation for wrongful convictions. And what's particularly notable here is the level of engagement from the public and the people directly affected by these laws.
For testimonies.
Yes, if you look at the committee hearing records, they detail incredibly powerful testimonies. Actual exonerees, individuals like Joshua Kieser and Kevin Strickland, who had lived through this exact nightmare of fighting the state for their own freedom. They showed up to testify in support of these bills. They were joined by organizations like the Midwest Innocence Project.
It's one thing to debate the abstract academic concept of finality of convictions in a Supreme Court chamber. It's an entirely different thing when a man who spent decades in a cell for a crime he didn't commit is sitting right in front of you at a microphone in a legislative committee room.
Looking lawmakers in the eye.
Exactly, looking them in the eye and asking them to fix the law. But here's the wild part. While lawmakers were trying to fix one part of the justice system, they were simultaneously using another part of it as a political football.
Oh, the budget trauma.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the dramatic subplot involving the budget for the Office of the Public Defender.
This was a remarkable example of how fragile state funding can be and how the power of the purse is wielded. During the budget hearings, state lawmakers threatened to hold up the entire public defense system's budget over a single personnel issue.
Let me set the scene for this because it sounds almost fictional. The Office of the Public Defender had hired an administrative assistant,
Right.
and this assistant had previously pled guilty to 2 felonies: endangering the welfare of a child and hindering prosecution involving the murder of her stepdaughter. Lawmakers found out about this hiring decision and essentially said to the head of the agency, fire this person or you don't get your funding.
That's the leverage.
That's like threatening to shut down an entire city hospital, stopping all the surgeries and emergency room visits because you don't like the background of the guy working the cash register in the gift shop.
That is a very apt analogy. The leverage the legislature was applying here was immense.
What?
Because the Office of the Public Defender is not an optional program.
No.
It is a constitutionally mandated service. It provides legal defense for thousands of indigent citizens across the state who cannot afford an attorney. If you hold up their budget, you threaten the fundamental operations of the entire criminal justice system.
You can't prosecute people if you can't provide them with defense counsel.
Exactly. But the pressure tactic worked. The Budget Committee noted that the Public Defender's Office complied with everything they were demanded to do, including firing the individual and making substantive changes to their hiring protocols.
And then?
Once that concession was made, the budget proceeded normally.
It really makes you pause and consider how a massive state agency's funding, which secures the constitutional rights of thousands of vulnerable people, can be brought to a screeching halt over the hiring of one administrative assistant.
It really does.
It shows how tightly the legislature holds the purse strings and how willing they are to pull them to enforce their will over the executive branch or independent agencies.
That tension over control, who gets to decide how things are run on a day-to-day basis, spilled right over into one of the most contentious battles of the entire 2025 session. We are moving from the state's control of public defenders to the state's control of public safety.
Specifically, the fierce legislative battle over House Bill 495.
Right, which was aimed at shifting control of the St. Louis Board of Police Commissioners.
This was a massive priority for Governor Mike Kehoe. The goal of HB 495 was to take the oversight of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department away from the city government and place it under a board controlled by the state. And the arguments from both sides were incredibly passionate, representing a fundamental clash of political philosophies that goes way back in Missouri history.
To understand the stakes here, we have to look at the core arguments documented in the legislative records. Proponents of the state takeover, which included Governor Kehoe, the Fraternal Order of Police, and the Attorney General's office, argued that the state needed to step in to provide the necessary tools to crack down on crime.
Okay.
They viewed local control as ineffective, bogged down by city politics, and argued that state oversight would bring stronger enforcement, better resources, and a more unified approach to public safety.
On the other side, the opponents, which included the mayor of St. Louis, the local police chief, and organizations like the NAACP, argued forcefully against stripping the city of its local autonomy. They argued that centralizing police power at the state level disenfranchises local voters. If you live in St. Louis and you have a problem with the police, you can vote out the mayor. But if a state board runs the police, your local vote doesn't matter.
It dilutes the local voice.
Exactly. They argued it removes accountability from the community that the police are actually sworn to protect.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a classic foundational American political struggle. Municipal home rule versus state sovereignty. Who knows best how to police a city?
Right.
The people who live in it, walk its streets, and elect its local leaders. Right. Or the state government that oversees the broader region and can theoretically marshal more unified resources?
It's a tough question.
It is worth noting that St. Louis actually had a state-controlled police board from the Civil War era all the way up until 2013 when voters returned it to local control. So this bill was an attempt to reverse that and put it back under the state's umbrella.
And because the struggle touches on such raw nerves of power and autonomy, the legislative battle over it was brutal. The records detail a grueling, intense 10-hour debate in the Senate over this single bill.
10 hours.
10 hours of senators holding the floor, arguing, wheeling, and dealing. And what emerged from that marathon session was a masterclass in the art of political compromise. Let's look at how the bill changed from when it started to when it finished.
It changed a lot.
The original House version of the bill was incredibly strict and micromanaged. It would have required that up to 4 citizen commissioners on the new state board be appointed from names submitted directly by the police unions, specifically the St. Louis Police Officers Association and the Ethical Society of Police.
The original House version also included strict, rigid language dictating the exact number of officers and their specific ranks to make up the police force.
Wow.
Furthermore, it included severe new felony definitions, stating that a person commits the offense of rioting, which they classified as a Class D felony, if they knowingly assemble with 6 or more other persons and violate any criminal laws.
Let me jump in there. So the original bill essentially gave police unions direct appointment power over their own bosses, micromanaged the police roster from the state capitol, and created harsh new felony riot charges.
Yes.
You can see why opponents were fighting tooth and nail against it, but after 10 hours in the Senate, almost all of that peripheral stuff was stripped out or heavily modified to get the core bill passed.
That is the nature of the legislative meat grinder. The final Senate compromise, which was eventually adopted, created a 6-member board. 1 member is the mayor.
Okay.
The other 5, including 1 non-voting member, are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. Crucially, the requirement that the governor must choose from a panel submitted by the police unions was completely dropped. The governor gets to choose his own appointees.
They also completely removed the language creating the new Class D felony for rioting. And instead of the state dictating the exact number and rank of officers from hundreds of miles away, the final bill left the numbers and ranks to the discretion of the newly formed board. It was a massive concession to get the core goal accomplished. The governor gets his state-appointed board, but without the union mandates and the strict micromanagement. And on March 28, 2025, Governor Kehoe signed HB 495 into law.
It's a textbook example of how a bill becomes a law in a polarized environment. You start with an aggressive wish list, you face fierce opposition, you engage in a war of attrition on the Senate floor,
Yeah.
and eventually you negotiate away the peripheral elements to secure the central mechanism of power.
And speaking of the mechanisms of power, nothing quite illustrates the raw, concentrated exercise of political will like a special legislative session.
Absolutely. The Missouri General Assembly didn't just wrap up their regular session in May, pat themselves on the back, and go home for the year.
Not at all.
They came back for two highly contentious special sessions in June and September of 2025. And when we look at what happened in these brief, highly compressed windows, it's staggering. We're talking about moving billions of dollars and fundamentally redrawing the maps of political power.
Let's start with the June special session. The regular session moves at a grinding pace over 5 months. A special session is like a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
The June session was dominated by two very different themes: massive corporate financial incentives and urgent, localized disaster relief. The absolute centerpiece of this session was Senate Bill 3, which was Governor Kehoe's key objective.
Right.
This was a massive $1.5 billion 30-year tax incentive plan designed to finance new or renovated stadiums for the Kansas City Chiefs and the Kansas City Royals.
Let's break down how that actually functions, because $1.5 billion doesn't just appear out of thin air.
Right.
According to the mechanics of the bill, the state isn't just writing a check from the General Revenue Fund. The funding plan allocates state taxes that are collected from economic activity at Arrowhead and Kauffman stadiums.
So think sales tax on hot dogs, jerseys, tickets.
Exactly. And the income tax of the employees working there. It uses that specific revenue stream to pay off the bonds for renovating Arrowhead and building a new Royal Stadium in Jackson or Clay counties.
Right. The economic argument is that the stadiums generate this tax revenue, so using it to keep the teams there pays for itself. But the counter argument is always that you're tying up massive amounts of future public tax dollars for a private entertainment business for the next 3 decades. And the way this passed is pure political theater.
It really was.
The state Senate debated this late into the night, faced a filibuster from opponents who hated the corporate subsidy, and finally approved the financing plan in the early morning hours before immediately adjourning.
And while they were moving billions for sports franchises in the middle of the night, they were also moving millions for urgent crises. Senate Bills 1 and 4 were passed during this same special session to address disaster relief.
Right.
Governor Kehoe had expanded the special session call to include this, establishing tax credits for insurance deductibles incurred from natural disasters, allowing families to claim up to $5,000 per homestead.
And SB 4 authorized the expedited disbursement of funds from the Missouri Housing Trust Fund for emergency aid. This is crucial because it specifically waived administrative costs and red tape burdens to speed up the delivery of assistance. It made families eligible if their adjusted gross income was equal to or less than 75% of the median family income. It is fascinating to see the state government operating on these two entirely different tracks simultaneously.
It really is a contrast.
Engineering a 30-year, billion-dollar corporate bond structure on one hand and stripping away bureaucracy so a family whose house was destroyed by a tornado can get emergency cash to fix their roof on the other.
And nested right within that same appropriation bill, SB 1, was a $50 million allocation for MUR.
MURR.
Yes. That's the University of Missouri's research reactor, a radioisotope science center on the Columbia campus. For context, radioisotopes are critical materials used in advanced, life-saving cancer treatments. It's a highly specialized facility. These special sessions become a vehicle for passing highly specific, high-priority items that either failed to cross the finish line during the chaos of the regular session or arose as sudden emergencies.
So that was June. Money, stadiums, disaster relief, and cancer research. A very busy few days. But then they came back again in September 2025 for the veto session, which immediately rolled into the second extraordinary special session.
Right.
And the topic this time wasn't money. It was pure political power. Redistricting.
Yes, the drawing of the federal congressional seats. This determines the physical boundaries of the districts that elect members to the U.S. House of Representatives.
High stakes.
Extremely high. The Missouri House passed HB 1 and HAR 3 to redraw these maps. The Senate convened, another filibuster ensued because mapping determines political survival, but ultimately both bills passed. However, the fallout from this was immediate and deeply litigious.
Looking at the strategic fallout, The records note that Democrats immediately began strategizing to collect the estimated 106,000 signatures required to put the new map to a citizen referendum vote.
Right.
The mechanism there is that if they succeed in gathering those signatures, the legislation isn't enacted until the referendum concludes, essentially putting the new maps on ice. But while the political maneuvering was happening in the streets with clipboards, the legal challenges dropped instantly in the courts.
2 major lawsuits were filed almost immediately. One, filed in Cole County by a group of citizens, argued that the new maps violate the Missouri Constitution.
How so?
The Constitution states that congressional districts may only be drawn once in a decennial period immediately following the U.S. Census. Because a map had already been drawn following the 2020 census, they argue the legislature cannot legally draw a new one until after the 2030 census.
Oh, wow. And the second lawsuit, filed by the ACLU on behalf of citizens in Jackson County, echoed that constitutional argument, but also pointed out a massive technical error.
Right, the drafting error.
They alleged that the slapdash process of rushing this through a high-pressure special session led to a drafting error. Apparently, the maps assigned a single voting tabulation district to both Congressional District 4 and Congressional District 5.
Which is a huge problem.
Right. Why did that matter? Because it creates overlap, which they argue violates the strict constitutional requirements for equal population and contiguity.
It highlights a critical vulnerability in the legislative process.
Right.
When laws are passed rapidly, late at night, under the immense pressure and fatigue of a special session, the likelihood of technical drafting errors increases significantly.
Yeah.
And in election law, a technical error involving a single voting district can jeopardize the legal standing of the entire statewide map.
Yeah.
It's the danger of moving too fast when the stakes are that high.
It just makes you marvel at the sheer volume of power moved during these brief, intense sessions. In a matter of days, they bound the state to a 30-year, billion-dollar sports contract, restructured disaster relief, funded a nuclear reactor for cancer research, and attempted to redraw the physical boundaries of federal political power. It's a stark contrast to the grueling, months-long, iterative pace of the regular session.
And while those massive, headline-grabbing bills dominate the news cycles and the late-night debates, the regular legislative session is actually where the quiet, profound social transformations occur. Let's shift our focus to the day-to-day civil and social laws debated in 2025.
The ones that affect us directly.
Yeah. These are the laws that rarely make the front page, but they intimately affect families, children, and how citizens manage their personal lives and final affairs.
Let's start with the laws focused on protecting children and vulnerable persons. One of the most significant pieces of legislation debated was Senate Bill 66, alongside House Bill 1200, which aimed to modify the legal age of marriage in Missouri. If you dig into the committee notes, you see that advocates from groups like Unchained at Last and the AHA Foundation testified passionately in support of this. They were alongside coalitions against domestic and sexual violence, bringing to light the very real, often hidden reality of child marriage laws and how older loopholes can be exploited.
Another deeply personal piece of legislation was House Bill 121, known as the Safe Place for Newborns Act. This bill established the Safe Place for Newborns Fund, specifically to provide grants for the installation of newborn safety incubators.
Often called baby boxes.
Right, baby boxes at hospitals, fire stations, and law enforcement agencies. It provides a safe, anonymous way for a parent in crisis to surrender an infant. It received unanimous support in its committee, demonstrating a rare moment of complete consensus on a social issue designed to protect vulnerable life.
But consensus is definitely not the norm for every social issue. The records document incredibly intense, highly engaged debates over reproductive health in 2025. The level of civic engagement here was absolutely off the charts.
It was unprecedented.
Lawmakers debated House Joint Resolution 73, which was an attempt to propose a constitutional amendment establishing new provisions relating to reproductive health care, essentially seeking to navigate around or overturn a voter-passed amendment from the previous November.
Simultaneously, they debated the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act under House Bills 195 and 1119. What is remarkable when you review the legislative updates is the sheer length and diversity of the witness lists for these hearings.
Yeah.
On both sides of the aisle, you saw massive public mobilization.
We're talking dozens and dozens of organizations and private citizens showing up. Testifying in opposition to certain measures, you had the American Civil Liberties Union, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and various religious and secular organizations. And testifying in support of the measures, you had groups like Missouri Right to Life, Campaign Life Missouri, the Catholic Conference, and organizations like Armorvine. It wasn't just professional lobbyists in suits.
No, not at all.
It was doctors in scrubs, advocates, and everyday citizens flooding the committee rooms, waiting hours for 3 minutes at the microphone. It paints a picture of a deeply engaged public fiercely debating the moral and legal fabric of their state.
And while those debates tackle the most polarizing moral questions of our time, the legislature is also tasked with the mundane yet absolutely essential duty of modernizing everyday law. For example, the Missouri Bar had several legislative priorities pass in 2025.
Right.
These are laws that dictate how business and personal affairs are legally recognized.
Like the passage of the Missouri Uniform Fiduciary Income and Principal Act, which sounds incredibly dry, but it fundamentally modifies how trusts and estates are administered.
Exactly. It ensures trustees have clear, modernized rules on how to balance the interests of current beneficiaries against future ones.
Or, taking it a step further, the Missouri Electronic Wills and Electronic Estate Planning Documents Act. That one is huge for average people.
It is. It finally modernizes the law to allow for electronic wills and confirms that the temporary suspension of physical appearance requirements during the COVID-19 emergency actually satisfied the legal requirements for estate documents executed during that time.
I remember this. In April 2020, people were terrified trying to get their wills in order, but you couldn't legally have a notary in the room with you because of the lockdowns.
Right.
So people were signing documents over Zoom or through a window. This law goes back and ensures that those emergency measures hold up in court.
Exactly. It ensures that a will signed via a video call during a lockdown remains legally binding years later. It's the invisible infrastructure of society, updating itself to match modern reality.
So what does this all mean? When you look at this giant stack of legislative updates and court rulings, from trust administration to electronic wills, from stadium bonds to the age of marriage, from releasing innocent men to arguing over police boards, you realize something. These seemingly dry legal updates are actually the source code by which our entire society runs. Every human interaction, every business deal, every personal tragedy is eventually quantified, debated, and codified into law in rooms in the state capitol.
To summarize our journey today, we started by looking at a single man, Christopher Dunn, fighting for his freedom against a state apparatus that argued its highest interest was the finality of his conviction.
Yeah.
We watched how the exposure of those wrongful convictions forced lawmakers to debate actual innocence claims and leverage the budget of the public defenders. We examined the grueling 10-hour struggle over whether a city or a state should control a police force.
10 hours.
We saw billions of dollars in congressional maps moved in the middle of the night during special sessions. And we reviewed the quiet, essential modernization of how we protect the vulnerable and write our wills.
It's a massive amount to take in, but I want to remind you, the listener, that the next time you drive past a massive sports stadium or hear a news report about a local police department or read a dramatic headline about a prisoner being released after 30 years, remember this deep dive. Just beneath the surface of those everyday moments is a dense, highly negotiated, constantly shifting web of state laws making it all happen.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on where we started. When a state creates complex legal machinery that is explicitly designed to value the finality of a conviction just as highly as the discovery of the truth, what happens to our societal definition of justice?
That's the big question.
Are we building a system that is optimized to be correct, or are we simply building a system that is optimized to be finished?